Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us today. Welcome to our latest webinar, as it says on the screen, Menopause in the Workplace, Supporting Your Employees. It's part of our Don't Pause on the Menopause campaign. I am Amy Davis, Head of Content for Reed. And over the course of the next hour, our lovely expert panel will explore how businesses can effectively support employees that are going through the menopause, helping women to continue to work comfortably and to stay in work in lots of cases. Before we get started, there's just some housekeeping to do. The webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to everyone who registered in a follow-up email later today, along with a feedback form. And we will also, in a couple of days, we've got an ebook on the topic as well that we will also be distributing out to you. Our panel discussion will last for about 45 minutes, and at the end you can put your questions to our panelists. So if you do think of any questions as we go along, please do submit them in the Q&A function on the top. It should be the right hand side of your screen, but then I don't know my left from my right, so it could be your left, so I'm sure you'll see it somewhere. So without further ado, before I skip on to the next bit, we'll get to your questions as soon as we can, and try and get through as many as we can. So without further ado, let me welcome today's guest. So firstly, we've got Jenny Haskey, who is the CEO of the Menopause Charity. Good afternoon, Jenny. Are you there?
Hi, yes, good afternoon. Delighted to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. We have Diane Danzebrink, who is founder of Menopause Support. Good afternoon, Diane.
Hi, Amy.
Thank you for joining us, Diane. We have Louise Hymers somewhere, who is marketing manager at PwC. Good afternoon, Louise.
Hi.
And then finally, last but not least, we have Helen Clark, who is Divisional Director of our Health and Care Division and has been instrumental in kind of driving the menopause here at Reed. Good afternoon, Helen.
Hello, Amy.
Okay, so thank you all for joining me. I see you all taking your sips of water, ready for the questions. So let's get started. Whereas the change was once kind of whispered about behind closed doors, it's now becoming widely acknowledged in society and the workplace. It seems like everywhere you go on social media, Instagram, TikTok at the minute, there's influencers talking about the menopause, and there just seems to be a lot more conversation happening about it. I want to ask you, for those that don't know, what are the symptoms of menopause and how can they vary between different women? Now, Jenny, I'm going to come to you on this first, and you'll probably answer the whole question, and then nobody else will be able to say anything. But go for it. Let us know what your thoughts are on this.
Thanks, and what an opening question. But yeah, I think there's always been a misconception, hasn't there, that menopause is just something that happens to you when you're old. It's just hot flushes and mood swings, but there are well over 34 symptoms of menopause, and you know, of course, there's changes to periods which most people recognise. But I think it's really important that everybody has that understanding of the vast range of physical symptoms, such as joint pain, itchy skin, fatigue, so many urinary symptoms as well. But also, and particularly when we think about the workplace, the psychological symptoms. So suddenly feeling unhappy, irritable, brain fog that we all talk about so much, and anxious. I think the list can feel pretty endless. It can feel overwhelming sometimes. And yeah, it's important to recognise that even though that list is overwhelming, everybody's menopause journey is unique to them. It is different. No one person experiences the same symptoms. So yeah, there's so much we can add, but we'd probably fill the hour just talking about the symptoms.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds wonderful, I'm sure. Anyway, we've got Jenny's picture for those of you at home, because Jenny she is in an area where they're getting thunderstorms at the minute, so her signal is intermittent. So Diane, over to you. What did Jenny miss? What else can you say?
Well, I think it's important to say with symptoms, as Jenny said, they're wide ranging, but I think it's also really important for people to know that approximately 1 in 4 will experience no symptoms at all. So menopause doesn't mean that everybody will have symptoms. So around 1 in 4 has no symptoms. but equally around 1 in 4 will describe their symptoms as debilitating. So as Jenny said, you know, the symptoms really fall into 3 main categories. So they're physical, cognitive and psychological. Cognitive symptoms generally are termed as brain fog, but really mean changes to memory and concentration. And for a lot of people, if you don't understand what's happening to you, that can be really worrying. But I would say that the symptoms that I counsel women about most regularly, and the ones that we hear about the most often at Menopause Support, are the psychological symptoms. Things like anxiety, low mood, mood fluctuations, changes to levels of confidence. And all of those things can be significant in all parts of our lives, and particularly in the workplace. And then Jenny mentioned the urinary symptoms. So the genitourinary symptoms of menopause are those that affect the bladder, the vulva and the vagina. And just to give you one example, it's going back a few years now, I counselled a woman who had left the workplace because her vulval symptoms were so distressing and so uncomfortable that she couldn't sit down for 8 hours a day at her desk. So you might not think, you might think, well, how is that possibly going to affect somebody in the workplace? But if you're experiencing those debilitating symptoms, you could just have one symptom that could make you make that decision. And equally, the length, depth and breadth of symptoms is going to be completely different for everybody. So I think the most important message is there is no one size fits all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Diane. Louise, anything you'd add to that?
Well, I do remember actually when I first met Diane and she gave me a menopause symptom checker. And I remember thinking, oh, I've got 18 of these and feeling quite proud about that until, you know, the journey began. But really, just to echo what the ladies have said, I mean, for me personally, I think my worst, at the very worst, having that sleep deprivation, and even now I probably still only sleep 3 to 4 hours an evening, and top that off with the brain fog, the anxiety, and actually you kind of lose your motivation as well, all tied in with the anxiety. You know, in your day-to-day work, that can have a massive impact. But touch wood, and I am here armed with my fan, hot flashes. You know, the symptoms do get easier over time. Fingers crossed.
That's good to hear. I'm yet to embark on it. Helen, what about you? What would you add to that?
Well, I think it's fairly clear based on what people have said already that this is so much more than hot flushes. And I think that's the one thing that, you know, people will always associate with the word menopause and the physical symptoms is, oh, I'm having a hot flush. But it can be a bit more subtle than that, and it can be a bit more discreet, or it can, as in my case, be a little bit more freight trainish. So the only thing that I would add to that is that the confidence that Diane mentioned earlier, that anxiety and low mood brings, can be one of the worst symptoms. For me, that certainly was in the last few months, that whole feeling of losing your sense of self. And I've read quite a lot myself about morning anxiety being at its worst and people feeling unable to get themselves going of a morning. Now that resonates with me massively, but, you know, thankfully, touch wood, I'm in a much better place thanks to being able to speak up for myself and challenging the status quo with the professionals. So we've heard already, there's so many symptoms, the list is massive and the depth and breadth is clearly, you know, all there for everybody to see. So, but everybody will be different, and some people, lucky them, will sail through, and then there'll be the others that will be a bit more debilitated by some of the symptoms, which is, yeah, challenging to say the least.
Thank you, ladies. So as a manager, kind of being able to obviously recognise and understand when employees are struggling is imperative. How do you think they can best do this? I mean, obviously some people might not want to talk to their employees. Diane, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I think you're going to hear some of the words that I'm going to say now regularly over the next hour, because this really all comes down to providing managers with the right information, with the right education to allow them to have those conversations. you can't possibly support something that you don't understand. So we've just talked about the breadth of symptoms. So if you don't understand what menopause is, why menopause happens, potentially how long it could last for, the fact that perhaps 1 in 100 will experience menopause under the age of 40, that perimenopause can happen in the early 40s, late 30s, that perimenopause to postmenopause lasts for an average of 4 to 8 years. If you don't understand all those things, it's very difficult to support it. So I think we always have to start with providing the right education and information to our teams so that they can not just for managers but for everybody, so that everybody has that awareness. So whether it's a colleague or whether it's somebody that you're line managing, hopefully that greater understanding leads to a little more compassion, and particularly in the situation of a manager, makes them feel more confident when somebody does approach them about having those conversations, and then perhaps looking at strategies for how they can support those individuals.
Brilliant. And Louise, what would you add to that? Like picking from things that are happening at PwC as well, I suppose, really.
And there's so much happening, and to Diane's point, absolutely correct. What we've tried to focus on is really educating people and taking them on the journey with us. So it's not just about talking to women, actually it's everybody, because the menopause is going to impact on everybody at some point, whether it be a wife, a partner, a colleague. And actually what's really surprised me and pleasantly surprised me, where we've created guidance for our career coaches or people managers, where we present at team meetings as well, just a kind of what is it, you know, how can you get support if you need it, and pretty clear guidelines in process. But the impact of that actually is a lot of other people, and especially younger people and the males, coming to us and wanting to have discussions, which I'm thrilled about, absolutely thrilled about.
Brilliant. Sorry, I had to go on mute, and so it took me a little while to come off. My dog was barking downstairs. They're a nightmare, aren't they, when you're on webinars? Helen, what are your thoughts on this?
I think, you know, certainly speaking about what we're doing at Reed, it's about making sure that it lives and that it breathes, and that it's a thing that we don't just pick up and put down. And that's kind of, you know, on my mission to be this menopause warrior, that I want to make sure that the dialogue is ongoing and that it's not just something that we talk about and forget about. But I think being able to spot somebody that might not be feeling quite right, but that's in itself is quite a skill. And I guess it depends on your nature of the relationship with that person. So for example, you know, spotting somebody that's in your line or your team in the office that isn't quite right, and being able to ask those questions in an open way. But again, that does rely on somebody feeling confident and comfortable enough to have that dialogue in the first place. So for us here at Reed, it's about making sure that everybody is understanding and awareness is being raised all the time. And there's plenty of things that I'll come on to later that we're doing as a business that will hopefully enable people to feel the arms of the business around them so that they can feel safe to have those conversations.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jenny, anything you'd add to that one? And also, what if people don't want to talk? What if you like? What can you do there? I
think, you know, obviously I echo everything that everybody said, and Diane quite rightly pointed out, there's probably a few things that we're going to repeat throughout this in terms of the importance ultimately of education and inspiring your workforce to be confident about having those conversations. You know, we're not asking managers, we're not asking or encouraging employees to suddenly become menopause experts overnight. We're asking them to have that understanding, to understand what it might be like going through menopause, what these symptoms are and how they may impact somebody in their work, so that we can then, as you say, recognise and know how we can best support that employee. You know, the stats are shocking in terms of women leaving the workforce, or as you say, not wanting to voice up, or even in some of the companies that are saying they're doing all of the right things. You know, actually are women comfortable talking to their line manager? So that education, that priority to aid the conversation and make people comfortable, confident talking about it. So really it stems from that culture, doesn't it? Just having a menopause policy is not going to create a culture where an employee suddenly feels comfortable talking to a manager, or vice versa, that manager feels comfortable and confident handling what could be a really difficult conversation. And I think, as Louise said, certainly some of the most powerful conversations I have when I talk to companies are with men, are with younger people who are kind of really inquisitive. What do I need to know to help best support my colleagues? Or, gosh, hang on, I've learned something today, and now I understand what's having an impact at home. So actually, what companies do, how we can best educate managers can have a huge ripple effect back into their homes and across their communities. So it is that feeling confident, understanding what we can so that we can help support our employees.
Brilliant, that's great. And I guess the more we talk about it, the more educated everybody's going to get, and it's just that kind of ongoing process, isn't it? So as part of our campaign, Reed commissioned a survey with 1,000 women aged 45 to 54 who are experiencing the menopause. These were obviously women that were working, and according to the results, 55% of the women said their employers do not support their menopausal needs, which is quite shocking, really, I think. Still a long way to go on the journey by the looks of things. What can managers be doing to help their staff? What kind of initiatives can be put in place to create kind of menopause inclusive workplaces? Louise, do you want to go with that one first? Because you've got some really good ideas of what you've done.
Very excited about this, and it's very surprising how much a hormonal woman can get done. I tell you. In my personal experience, when I started going through it, when I started to look for support, I just couldn't find what I was looking for. And first and foremost,
Where were you looking, Louise? Sorry to interrupt.
Internally,
where were you?
Within the
okay,
firm.
Just within. Okay.
So we don't actually have a menopause policy. My view now, that is still the right thing, because one size doesn't fit all. But I guess the starting point was, other people must be going through this. I'm gonna set up a group. And something so simple as setting up a community group, a safe space where people can talk, and we've got probably nearly 1,000 members now already. It's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. And we kind of use that group as a real kind of sharing experience. I mean, there is everything on there. I mean, there's some really funny stories as well. I think it is quite important to, when this journey can be quite difficult, to bring in the humour as well at some point. And that kind of progressed to, we introduced some monthly menopause cuppas, and that is the really safe space where people can be very honest and open. I would say personally, those two things had a massive impact and are very easy to do in any business, any size. We then took it a bit further on, where we started looking at our private healthcare and what could we do there, because as we all know, it can sometimes be a challenge to get appointments with the doctor. So we got included an appointment with a menopause specialist. Again, I mean, that did take some time to do, and obviously, the business has got to have some sort of private health care scheme in place. But again, the impact has been massive for the people that have needed that. And then another thing which I'm massively proud of, so when you're off sick, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to have to give your employer a reason for being off sick. Ours goes through our kind of sort of workday people system, and you have drop down reason what you include. There was no menopause, so I thought that's going to change, so we got that added. And again, it's not just a tick box, it's the message, in my view, that it gives to say, actually, for those suffering with debilitating symptoms and you have to take time off work, you don't need to lie and say you've got a stomach bug or a cold. And I just think that's massively empowering. So for us, those are I'll stop talking now, but those are the key ones for me that have had a really big impact.
Brilliant. That's really interesting. And you said also that other people from other areas of PwC have approached you to come and help them do the same kind of thing in their region.
Yeah, so I'm off to Belgium in October.
Oh, nice. Lovely.
And talking to the Middle East at the moment. So I'm a little bit like Davina on tour, aren't I? But yeah, so but not also sort of other territories within PwC, but actually sort of promoting what we're doing on social media has had a big impact on other businesses approaching us to see, you know, how can we do what you're doing? You know, you're massively seen as a big supporter of your women. To be fair, not just in menopause, but other areas as well. How can we replicate that? So from an employer perspective, it kind of ticks a lot of boxes. First and foremost, you're supporting your staff who are going through this, but also it opens the doors to lots of other opportunities to help more people as well.
Brilliant. Great for your EVP too, isn't it, really? Helen, what would you say on this?
So I'm going to talk a little bit later on about some of the other things because I think it might be more relevant there. But one of the things that really struck me about this, and actually it's only more recently that it has struck me, as I've already explained, but not so long ago, December time, actually, I started to look after one of our trainers, Maya, who is delivering sessions to some of our clients around this. And had I not been involved in that new working relationship with her, I don't think my awareness would have been where it is now. So being able to recognise some of those symptoms and just collaboratively working with some of those people that have that knowledge. So as the first step, really similar to what Louise has already described, my knowledge is improved by having the dialogue internally at Reed because well, I'm perimenopausal, so I now recognise that about myself. And then secondly, we have done quite a bit internally to try and get that dialogue going. So we have sessions called Lunch and Learn, and we've raised awareness and will continue to raise awareness, trust me, about what is happening with this and how we can better work together and support each other. And one of the things that will spin off from that in our new financial year, which is a stone's throw away in a couple of weeks' time, will be we've signed up the working agreement for embarking on Menopause Cafe. So Louise has described it as a menopause cuppa, I think you said. So we're embarking on the same kind of journey, if you like, with using the Menopause Cafe and being able to just have a safe space. So we are really hoping that people will really get behind that. And obviously the agenda for that is there is no agenda. Anybody and everybody can come on regardless. So I'm really looking forward to that. And as part of that, we'll be looking to bring other people into the working group to share their knowledge and experience so that it does become more of less of a taboo subject and more of a normal conversation.
Brilliant. Jenny, anything, what would you say? What initiatives have you seen being put in place, or what should be put in place?
Louise and Helen have already given a couple of, a few fantastic suggestions that actually really get to the heart of that. Raising awareness, aiding that conversation. When we talk to somebody else and discover actually, oh God, I'm not alone. I think particularly in that workplace setting, that's really important. I think it's also really important that we recognise, just as no one individual experience is the same menopause, no company is the same. Often no department in an organisation is the same. So sometimes when we talk about sort of reasonable adjustments and practical support and some things that companies do, we have to appreciate that not all companies can go down those routes. Flexible working is brilliant if you can make that happen. It's not always appropriate to somebody on a shop floor. So we have to understand it's great when companies think about these practical and reasonable adjustments, and we always support people through that. But I think it comes back again to this education. If companies create the space to make sure that the webinars are through these cafes or whatever, if there are regular webinars, education sessions like this, where people can access information, understand menopause, understand the treatment options, understand the lifestyle changes, things that can help them that little bit, particularly with the symptoms that they're experiencing in work, then actually we're getting to the root cause. So we might not need a fan on our desk. if we actually understand different things that we can be doing to help manage our symptoms. So having that education at the heart of what we're doing is, you know, still 100% crucial in terms of those kind of those initiatives. I think that's really key and really important. We've talked about it, you know, a menopause policy can sometimes just be that tick box exercise. Some companies, you know, are able, and Louise touched on this in terms of the healthcare options. Some companies have even gone one step further and provided access to HRT, access to prescription, access to Bupa plans. So particularly to workforces where maybe getting time off work. We had a woman contact us last week who can't get the time off work to go to her appointment. Well, that, you know, she's not going to stay in that role, is she? She's not going to, she's becoming so poorly that she can't work. She's worried she's going to leave. So it's education and what support can we put in to help people manage those symptoms.
Brilliant, Jenny, thank you. And Diane, finally to you, is there anything left to say?
I think it's really important that we remember that not all organisations are multinationals, and not all of them have a lot of funding to put behind things like education and training. You know, you might have small and medium size, you might have micro businesses out there who have women who are experiencing menopause. So I think looking at some of the sort of freely available options, some of the things, particularly around education. So there's now lots of good resources out there where there's lots of good information, good factual evidence-based information out there. Having a support group is free. It's just about providing the space. Some of those support groups are run online. They're not all face-to-face. You might have somebody in your organisation like Louise, who's really passionate about this and volunteers to be a menopause advocate or a menopause champion. Again, I think it's important to look at the things that potentially can be done for very little cost, but that can be incredibly impactful and allow you to retain your talent. I think in bigger organisations, senior leaders sharing their experiences where they feel comfortable to do that can certainly make staff members feel, okay, so if they're prepared to talk about it, then I can speak up about what I'm experiencing too. And then where there are good information resources, sharing those via your intranet. And actually, if you have people in the building, so whether that's an office, a factory, whatever it might be, making hard copies of those things available. So at Menopause Support, we've just published a booklet called Understanding Menopause, which we've had 4 clinical advisors work with us on. So we're absolutely sure of that information and that it's correct. But there are lots of other things out there too. Having posters about menopause, having posters about your support groups, etc. So, you know, as other contributors have said, we do have to think about the diversity of organisations as well as the diversity of individual experience.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Diane. Okay, so we've touched on this a little bit previously, but our survey also found that 44% of women polled wouldn't discuss their menopause or perimenopause symptoms with their employer. They didn't feel they could. What should a manager do if their employee is reluctant to talk about it, and how it might be impacting their work specifically? Is there anything that can be done? I presume you can't force anybody to speak about it if they don't want to. Helen, what would you say on this one?
So I just wanted to touch back on some things that Diane said, which resonated with me massively. So I've probably formed more meaningful relationships around this subject in the last 6 months because I'm a leader in this business and my role is big, and if I can help somebody else in their day, I will happily do that by sharing my experience, and I try to do that as much as is possible, whilst trying to maintain the game face that is trying to lead a business and trying not to be showing one's symptoms all too often. But yes, there's plenty that can be done, and I suppose you know, Louise has touched on this already, and it's been mentioned before, but we're trying to create a sense of this being safe at Reed. And so some of the things that we'll be doing in the coming financial year, I've already highlighted. We'll be doing menopause cafes. We'll be making sure that people who need signposting to somebody that they can talk to about this. And I've taken on the mantle for the next 2 years of being the gender lead for our inclusion and belonging working group, so with a special interest in this. So I'm currently undertaking a little wellbeing qualification. I'm not a doctor. I wish I was, but I'm not. So my knowledge of this, and hopefully imparting that on people. So we're calling that menopause mentor time. So having a one-to-one with somebody about it and having, you know, really confidential discussion. We're about to relaunch our learning platform and bringing this to life with access to resources, various carousels of our lunch and learns that we've done before on this subject. And obviously, Amy, you'll be involved in that in terms of making it look and feel pretty internally. But it's also important that people who are in management roles, and the men, I mean, I work, my line manager is a man, and you know, I'm not too proud to admit he has seen and watched me cry quite a lot the last 6 months, but I have felt able to have that dialogue with him because I felt able to let him see that's been important to me in that moment. So I think there's plenty that can be done, and it will all depend on each individual organisation as to their approach. But having somebody championing it as the voice internally is a great place to start, which is what I fully intend to do here.
Brilliant, thank you. Jenny, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, as Helen said, that's all kind of so sensible. We have to recognise that this is something that a lot of people can feel really embarrassed and reluctant to talk about, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just the stigma that can be attached to menopause, or, you know, let's face it, the stiff British upper lip that sometimes we don't talk about, we don't discuss these things, especially not in work. But also then there's the added impact of, you know, how can I talk about brain fog and things that are impacting me in work to my line manager, because that somebody might worry that they're directly saying I can no longer do my job. So we have to recognise that, you know, those thoughts coupled with the symptoms of anxiety, the knock to our confidence, it can feel really overwhelming. So if we're a manager, you know, thinking about how best we can get somebody to open up. We're, like I said, we're not asking, and Helen touched on it, none of us are clinical doctors. You know, we're not encouraging line managers or anybody in the workplace to become a absolute menopause expert. We ultimately want to signpost people to the right sources. We want to encourage people to go and see their doctor for support. We want people to be aware of a range of support available. And we can't make assumptions about somebody's health. It's all the usual HR. We can't railroad in and say, oh God, you know, you're struggling again today. Is it the menopause? You're at that time of life. So it's again comes back to education. When we understand the symptoms, when we understand and have empathy with how somebody might be feeling, then actually we can start to think about just some really subtle questions to start that conversation. How are you doing at the moment? I've noticed that you've been feeling tired. Are you okay? Just slowly and regularly, constantly, if you recognise that somebody is struggling, just slowly and constantly encouraging them to want to open up, know that they're in a safe space, particularly if you're in an organisation where you've not got the numbers to set up menopause cafes, support groups, do all of the other things. If, as Diane quite rightly mentioned, if we're looking at small companies, well, it's not impossible to have this support. We need to just really put our fantastic day-to-day management skills in place and really make that employee. We want them to be thriving in the workplace. So how can we help support them? And if you're not the right person to have that conversation, then signpost and identify somebody that they can.
Brilliant. That's really good advice there. I think the more you ask the questions, the more you talk to people just generally about how they feel, the more open that hopefully they'll be with you. I've certainly gone through that experience with someone in my team who, after like weeks and weeks of saying, "Are you all right?" Is and eventually they completely opened up. So yeah, great advice there. Diane, what would you add to Jenny's comments?
I think if as an employer or as a line manager, you're aware of somebody who is unwilling to come and speak to you, the question you should be asking yourself is, why are they unwilling to come and speak to me? And my experience of supporting thousands and thousands of women over the last few years is that often that comes down to workplace culture, and that they're actually fearful of having those conversations because they're fearful that they're going to be met with a dismissive attitude, or that the culture within the organisation is not supportive. Now, culture is something that isn't built overnight, and culture is certainly something that's not changed overnight. And I think that really speaks to, you know, sort of what is the fundamental culture of the organisation? Are we a supportive organisation? Are we looking to support everybody within our organisation with whatever they're experiencing? Do we have an organisation where people feel comfortable to come and seek those conversations out? And as Jenny said, you know, sort of a lot of this comes down to, are you having those regular catch-ups anyway? Not because you've noticed that somebody is not okay, but because you care enough to find out how somebody is doing on a regular basis. So I think that would kind of lead to bigger questions for me. But I think in the very short term, you know, there are options for if you as a manager don't feel that you're able to have that conversation, you don't feel that you're equipped to have that conversation, then if you're in a bigger organisation, you might have HR, you might have wellbeing, you might have occupational health, maybe signposting somebody, but it's how you do that signposting if they're not willing to confide in you. And for me, that would be leading to those bigger questions.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Thanks, Diane. Lou, anything you'd add there?
No, I think the ladies have pretty much covered all of it, actually. I completely agree. The only other last thing I would add is that something actually Diane said earlier about having that support right from the very top, I think is key. And I completely agree. If we have people that are struggling, we should be questioning that, absolutely. But I think having that support from your top, and that can be any size company, big or small, you've got to have the senior people on board. And again, not just talking around menopause, but, you know, the wider wellbeing piece.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think so, definitely. It's just really about education, isn't it? Really, that's everything. It's all stemming around education. So we're getting short of time. So what I'm going to do is the next question I'm going to only put to a few of you, and then just to cut it down a little bit. So if mental and physical symptoms are prolonged and debilitating for those going through the menopause, how can an employer make concessions for those struggling to help them maintain their usual performance? Like you said, Lou, earlier, you've struggled to concentrate sometimes, things like that. So what can be done, and at what point could it be potentially leading to dismissal? Are there cases of that? I think, Jenny, I'll probably go to you and Diane for that one. So Jenny, if you want to go first, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think that kind of language around this leading to dismissal, we have to, against the backdrop of us talking about how many women and the high percentage of women really concerned and not opening up in the workplace, to then be talking about, well, how does this lead to dismissal, is not going to help people open up, is it? So, you know, what we want to be doing is using that culture that we've all talked about so much, that's the culture that stems around education and training, culture that has leadership that's dedicated to tackling the stigma, so, and being supportive, because when people have access to treatment options, when they know the lifestyle changes they can make to help manage those menopause symptoms, then actually they're going to thrive. They'll be thriving in life as well as in the workplace. So I think it's really important that if we focus on tackling those elements, then actually we're getting to the root cause rather than leaving it to a situation where people are going to be leaving or feeling that they're being performance managed. So I think that's really important that we focus on that. You know, there are reasonable adjustments, there are practical support elements that we can do, and as we've all talked about, that natural role in terms of supporting our colleagues. We want our staff to be thriving, we want people to be enjoying their work, and there's simple little, you know, tools that anybody can do, a well-being plan that helps consider, you know, you and your line manager, okay, what have I tried, what might help me, what reasonable adjustments can I do in my workplace? So lots of little simple things, so we never need to get to that point where somebody feels they can no longer stay in work, or ultimately that we're talking about people being dismissed. We don't want that, and it doesn't need to happen.
Brilliant. And Diane, anything to add to that?
I think it's really about keeping the conversation going. You know, as I said, perimenopause to postmenopause, on average, you're talking between 4 and 8 years. So if you have somebody who is feeling debilitated by their symptoms, who has felt comfortable enough to come and speak about them, what they come and speak to you about initially might look very different 3 or 6 months or a year later. So it is really important that the door is always open, and that you are active in keeping up with that individual, checking that perhaps the adjustments that you might have made are still working for them, encouraging them to come to you and tell you when they're not working and when amendments need to be made. You know, I think it's really clear from lots of surveys that have been done in recent years that, you know, sort of approximately 1 in 4 individuals consider leaving the workplace during perimenopause to postmenopause. And that tallies very closely with the 1 in 4 who experience debilitating symptoms. You know, organisations certainly don't want to be losing their talent. And as somebody who counsels lots of individuals who sadly have already taken the decision to leave the workplace, the effect on them personally can be devastating. So if there's anything that we can do to avoid that happening, it's got to be worth our time and effort.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. So next question, we've touched a little bit on policies. Lou, you mentioned that you've decided not to implement one at PwC. The research that we did do highlighted that 46% of organisations that the women we worked in that we surveyed, they basically said they didn't have any kind of menopause support or policies menopause support policies in place. Do you think companies should implement them? Obviously, PwC have it on their choice and how they run and how it works. And if they do, how can you go about creating a policy? Lou, I don't know whether you just want to talk quickly about why you decided not to, and then maybe Diane, if you could pick up on what you could, if you decided you wanted one, what could be in that'd be brilliant.
So we did have a discussion, and you know, quite quickly we kind of thought, well, do we actually need one? Because as we said earlier, everyone's journey is different. We do, however, have policies for other issues. I would, however, what I would say is we do have a fantastic support guide, almost like a pack, and it's working very closely with other people. So we haven't done this alone. You know, we got in touch with our wellbeing team, our inclusion team. It was a real combined effort to make sure that we had a lot of content in there that was helpful to everybody. And on top of that, we've also got the extra guidance that is aimed at various different people. So we've got a very specific guidance for career coaches, line managers. I know, Diane, I'm going to share what you shared with me the other day, which was a whole piece around specifically helping relationships, which was super helpful, and I've used that so much already. So I think it's kind of making sure that you've got all the support there, you know, a sort of a place where everybody can find stuff, what they need, but also now we're thinking outside of the box. How can we help other people? We're hoping to put together a whole series of videos, and this is purely going on feedback that we've got from our members in our group and what's impacting them at the moment. So, you know, videos specifically around same-sex relationships and sort of people struggling who may be going through cancer or other treatment that they can't take HRT as well. We're having sort of lots of conversations around there. So that's our plan. But I think if I was giving some advice to any employer is, you know, start at the beginning and just sort of start collating, even if you just have the symptom checker as a starting point. Great start.
Brilliant, thank you. And Diane, if people did want to do a policy or felt they needed one, where would they start with that?
Yeah, I think with policy, policy potentially can be useful, but policy in isolation often is not worth the paper it's written on, because if you don't have a supportive culture, if you don't have education and information, then it's really, as I say, it's not worth the paper it's written on. But I think if people do want one and they feel that it's going to be useful, you would be surprised at the amount of organisations out there now who have a policy, who would be prepared to share their policy or a template of their policy with you. Also, lots of unions have policy and they provide those freely available online. It might not be the perfect one for you. One that springs to mind for me, several years ago, I was invited to speak at the launch of the Wales TUC policy, but they also had a whole workbook of how you can help to support, and they really were kind of early adopters of menopause support. So now lots of unions in lots of areas of work have published those publicly, and they're freely available for you to base your own policy on.
Brilliant. We have done one as part of this. We've kind of looked at Reed's one and done a template as a little starting point if people haven't got anything. But like you say, it does need to go alongside something, but it's a starting point and a bit of a direction, I guess. Sorry, Jenny, go for it.
No, I know we're short on time, but I would just say as well, and as Diane says, there are so many fantastic templates out there. The best thing though, if you are looking at embedding a policy, when you have that template or that starting point, engage your staff from different areas of the workforce. So many companies I've spoken to have done the great work of setting up a policy and loads of other initiatives, and then when they've looked at rolling it out, other areas of the workforce have gone, yeah, that's great if you're sat at a desk in head office. However, here I am out on the shop floor or running around in a restaurant or whatever else my role is. That's not practical. So it is just a tick box exercise. So engage staff from across the organisation if you're looking at a workplace policy.
Brilliant. Okay, so finally, I'm going to ask Helen, I'm going to ask you this and Jenny as well. What do you think the ideal menopause, well, actually, I can ask all of you, if you're all very brief, what is the ideal menopause inclusive workplace like? What does it look like? And do you think as a nation we're far from achieving it?
I think if I'm going first, which I've just decided I'm going to do because I've clearly started talking. Yes. Okay. So for me, the ideal menopause inclusive workplace: safe, responsive, listening, education. We've said that many times today, haven't we? And not just doing what it says on the policy, but actually having the actual let's get this done, and being committed to it. Are we far from achieving it? I think that will vary depending on where each individual organisation is. So yeah.
Brilliant. That was a good answer, Jenny.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Echo everything that Helen said. We have the Menopause Charity Workplace Quality Mark, and really that stems around 3 core pillars. So really simple: education at the heart of all the activity that you're doing, aid the conversation to create that safe space, and have leadership dedicated to tackling the stigma. So again, that culture is absolutely key. Are we far from achieving it as a nation? Do you know what? More and more companies are talking about it. More and more people are talking about it positively and seeing the benefits. I'm not going to say we're there yet. We're still a long way, but we're talking about it. We're here doing this now, so that's got to be a step in the right direction.
Fabulous. Diane?
I think there's some fabulous work going on in some places. There are lots of organisations who haven't started yet, but I think if we look back, you know, when I started campaigning back in 2015, it was a very, very lonely place. Now there's so much more going on. So I think we also have to think sort of in timelines, how much has been done in a relatively short space of time. And I think as far as what does a menopause inclusive workplace look like, well, it looks like an organisation that supports everybody who might be experiencing menopause. So that could be transgender and non-binary, friends, family and colleagues. And I think the keys to it are certainly education, support, and finally kindness. Kindness can be life-changing and occasionally life-saving.
Great. Lou?
I'm just going to say one word: empower. So I think, you know, very briefly, I think the more that we open up, the more we become brave and telling our stories as well. I think it's quite empowering, and it's, you know, that can lead to so many more things as well. And we've seen that. We've seen that here in the discussions that people are having, including, you know, we've got a male ally group now, which is fantastic, and the younger generation getting involved on the journey. So it's going to involve, but we're empowering people as well.
Brilliant. Great. Oh, ladies, I could talk to you about this for hours and hours, but we're running out of time. We've got quite a few questions that have come through, and we're like at 52. So apologies those of you who are watching, because we might run over a little bit, but we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Okay, firstly, the first one come through is, do you have any recommendation for training women's health / menopause champions in the workplace? Louise, have you got any champions or anything?
We have an unofficial group, but I think there's probably one for Diane more.
Diane,
actually.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I think as far as menopause champions are concerned, you know, there's a lot of training springing up, but actually a lot of it comes down to just being able to be a good listener and being able to be a good signposter, because, you know, you don't have to be an expert to be able to be a menopause champion. It's having somebody who is signposted within your organisation. And as I said before, very often that's somebody who has had a difficult experience themselves, who's really passionate about it and wants to ensure that nobody has the experience that they have. So for me, I don't necessarily think that formal training is required. I actually think, as I say, there's a lot of good resources out there. You're not expecting somebody to give advice. What you're doing is you're saying, here's somebody you can talk to who could empathise with what you're experiencing, and they can signpost you in the right direction.
Brilliant. Jenny?
Yeah. I was just going to add, because I think Diane's absolutely right, and there are so many resources. So having that signposting, you know, on your intranet or wherever, so people can access that information, but also recognise you've probably already got elements in place in work. You might already have mental health first aiders. So upskill them. If you've already got a wellbeing officer, make sure these key people, these initiatives, you know, so often we don't want organisations to think, oh my goodness, as well as a mental health first aider, as well as a wellbeing officer, we've now got to have a menopause champion. You know, think about where you've already got people who, as Diane said, those listening skills are key. If you do one thing, train all of your employees in terms of how to listen, that art of conversation, as well as having that signposting in terms of the education, then that's a great starting place.
Brilliant. Anything to add, Helen? Because you're going to be
No.
our champion at Reed.
No,
I think
no,
it encompasses
nothing
you.
that the learned ladies haven't already said. No.
Perhaps you could take this one, Helen, because you've been quite instrumental in this at Reed. What kind of event, Faye is asking, is a menopause cafe? Is it literally just a cup of coffee and a chat kind of thing?
So that could be twofold. So it could be online. I think given the size and scale of our business, we will be looking to do that online in the first instance. And then clearly there are menopause cafes that go on everywhere, and they are in cafes, as the name suggests. So it could be turning up to an online forum like this with a brew, maybe some cake, depending, or it could be something physical and in person in an office. But yeah, have a look at the website, Menopause Cafe. It's brilliant. Lots of useful information on there. You're on mute, Amy.
It was the dog barking again.
Okay,
so
yeah,
it completely throws me, especially being live on a webinar, and I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. Okay. Somebody anonymously has asked, should you be offered an occupational health assessment to help you and the employer to identify any reasonable adjustments that you may need in your workplace? Jenny, do you want to take that one?
I think if your organisation has occupational health, if that's an opportunity, then absolutely. Anything that's going to support you as the employee or as an employer and get that core support is going to be really beneficial. So yeah, again, not all organisations have the luxury of having access and routes to occupational health. If you do, then absolutely, I think that's a great area. Somebody may feel more comfortable talking to occupational health about the symptoms that they're experiencing and considering those practical adjustments that can be made.
Fabulous. I've got a comment / question from Sarah. She says, hi, I'm a career advisor and previously worked as a physio. I just wanted to note that I used to treat a lot of women with joint issues of unknown cause, and these were hugely impactful on their daily life. My question is around the availability of HRT. There has regularly been a national shortage. Have you noticed this impacting people that you work with? Diane and Jenny, I suppose this one's more for you. Have you guys noticed that?
I've certainly heard from people who've been impacted by these ongoing shortages. A lot of it comes down to increased levels of anxiety, people actually being anxious about whether or not their pharmacist is going to be able to fulfill their prescription, and then the anxiety of having to trek around locally to see if they can pick up what they need, or then having to get a further appointment with their GP to have their prescription changed. So certainly I think, you know, sort of the psychological effects, the emotional effects of this, it's ongoing, because for some of those products, sadly, we still don't know when those shortages are going to be resolved.
Brilliant. Jenny, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, as that anxiety can just be really stressful. So having that knowledge and that understanding, recognising, supporting your colleague to know that they may need extra time off during the day, or just some time set aside where they can go and find some alternatives. It's really difficult for HRT shortages, and as Diane said, it doesn't look like it's going to be going away anytime soon. And there can be additional challenges with that. Changing your type of HRT can not just, you know, impact on your anxiety levels and the stress, but actually it will have a direct impact on some of the symptoms that you may be experiencing as well. So it can be a really unsettling time. Layer that onto the stress of work and trying to keeping on and keeping calm is a real difficulty. So understanding.
Great, thank you. Louise, this might be one for you. How big an impact do you think menopause has or has had on women in senior leadership and main board positions?
I think it's been huge, and I think I should be very brief, but I think if we look back 20 years ago, I mean, a lot of the conversations we weren't having because I don't really think they existed. but it has had a big impact. I think we're a long way to go in terms of how people are brave and open to discuss their experiences in senior positions. And again, to my point I made earlier, we've got a couple of very senior women who are fabulous. They're very open, and that it has a ripple effect down the rest, you know, into the rest of the staff. So I think, again, there are things that companies can do to help that. I know we've put certain things into place to encourage senior people to stay within the firm. I think it's a really tricky one. I think that that's not an easy question, Amy, to end on.
No. Helen, what about you? Because obviously
Yeah.
you're in a leadership position at Reed. Do you think that it has a bigger impact on those in more senior and board positions?
I think that depends on the individual and how prepared they are to talk about what is happening to them, and if they're prepared to let that be known. I can't really answer the question in terms of how much of an impact has it had, because I think, you know, as I've already said a number of times today, the fact that I've been completely blissfully unaware about this subject until it's happened to me is a problem, right?
Yeah.
And it shouldn't necessarily be that way, should it? So it's a bit of an unknown question, that.
Yeah.
It's a very, very thought-provoking one for sure, but I don't really know. Yeah, there'd be some interesting stats on that at some point down the line, I'm sure.
Yeah, I guess it would be more interesting as we see more women at board level, but there's not that many women at board level yet, is there? So
exactly.
If I could just add to that, sorry, very quickly.
That's right.
When people do share their story at senior level, it has a really, really positive impact. Really positive.
Yeah.
It encourages people to speak up, I should think.
Absolutely.
Because I think if they're doing it, I can do it too. One for you, Helen. I think from a recruitment point of view, someone's asked, should the menopause be voiced at application?
Oh, good Lord. Well, I suppose it absolutely should, because why shouldn't it? But the reality is, given all the things that we've talked about today, the chances are that there would be a level of, oh, I shouldn't be saying this, or is this going to hinder me from getting this job? I mean, you know, clearly this isn't a disability, is it? This is a stage in a woman's normal life, or whoever is going through the menopause's normal life. So should we be asking that question? Well, I don't suppose it should matter whether or not we should, I suppose. Oh, God, Amy, why do you ask me that one?
It's a hard one. No.
Yeah, it's a hard one,
think
that.
They shouldn't be judgmental. Inclusive employers should be inclusive, and it shouldn't matter, and you should be open.
Exactly.
What you're trying to say is the fact is that not everybody.
What I was trying to say. Thank you ever so much for summarising that marvellously.
Is that you could research that organisation and see, actually, is it evident that there is a positive culture? So it doesn't mention at the point of application, but if you're thinking of joining an organisation, maybe you want to check that, hang on, is this a company that's got the right culture at heart? Because so many companies that are making an impact and considering their employees, then they're talking about it and they're really proud about how they support their colleagues. So I think there's a different way around of doing that.
See if you align with them and their beliefs. So Diane, one for you here. Someone's asked, how effective have you found training around understanding the menopause in the workplace? Does it seem to have supported a whole staff understanding? I guess they're asking, is there any point in training all your staff on understanding the menopause, and what impact would that have?
A huge impact. You know, I would always advocate for training everybody, because regardless of the workplace, 50% of the world's just over 8 billion population are going to experience it directly. The other half are going to experience it indirectly. Nobody's going to get through life without either experiencing menopause or knowing or loving somebody that does. So it's important that we all know about it. And something else that I would say about the importance of the workplace in this conversation is that for those who are from a culture where menopause is not spoken about, and in fact, in some cases, there is no word for menopause, the workplace can be the only place where they're likely to get information. So I'll give you a brief example. I was doing some training in a GP surgery a few months ago, huge practice. We had 4 sessions during the day of around 15 people each. And one of the young women in the session said, "Oh my goodness, I realised this is my mum, but I have never heard this spoken about." So it just goes to show you that this wasn't, she had information for her for when menopause came along for her, but actually she was going to go back and share it with her mum. And I have to say, for the organisations that I work with, the feedback that we get, and I'm sure Jenny will say similar, the feedback that we get on this is that they can see and hear light bulb moments going off. It really improves the cohesiveness of their organisation. It really helps to normalise the conversation. And, you know, I have a particular client that I've worked with for several years now, who the men in the organisation have actually requested to have sessions just for them, so that they can ask all of the questions that they don't feel quite so comfortable asking. They've also provided sessions that I've led for family and friends. So I think the impact that the workplace can have in this conversation can potentially be huge and really positive.
Fantastic. You've all been an absolute inspiration and an absolute pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm not going to ask one more question, but we've had a comment from someone called Jackie in the audience, and I think it just kind of summarises the whole thing really. She says, not a question, but an observation that supports what some of the speakers today have said. The very fact that we're having this conversation this afternoon means that at long last this topic is being heard, and organisations are starting to take it seriously. It's such a shame that many of us have arrived at our perimenopause and menopause without the knowledge we needed to help us live our lives normally. But it is so important that the generations that follow us do not face the same challenges and barriers. And I think that kind of summarises it really, really well. I really like that paragraph. Thank you all very, very much. I think that's all we've got time for today. We're nearly at 10 minutes past the time we were supposed to finish, and we've still got 74 people on the call, so that's fantastic. Thank you all. We will be in touch shortly with our ebook that we've put together on this, with some commentary from our experts. Also, there's a QR code on your screen right now. If you want to join in with any other events that Read are running, please have a look at our website and see what else we have coming up, or get in touch with your consultant who can direct you in the right place. And please do complete our feedback form after the webinar that you'll get today, along with the recording of the webinar, just so we can see how we can improve going forward. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much all for your time. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.